Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 2026 Request for Applications webinar. My name is Chanel Ford. I'm the Director of Programs for the Native American Agriculture Fund. I grew up on the Spokane Indian Reservation. I'm an enrolled member of the Spokane Tribe, and I am very grateful to be here today with you all. So today we are going to be discussing specifically our RFA overview. And with that, we'll discuss the changes, we'll talk about eligibility, we'll talk about funding categories, deadlines, found it walkthrough, and a Q&A to wrap us up. I also want to note that this webinar is scheduled from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Time, and it will also be recorded and available on our website. To discuss with you our Q&A process, I'm going to pass it on over to Whitney.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Whitney Sawney. I am a citizen of Cherokee Nation and the Director of Communications and Policy at NAAF. We are grateful for your time today, and so thank you for joining us for a review of our grant application. But before we start our presentation, just a few housekeeping items. First, we will have a dedicated question and answer session at the end of this presentation. And we do have members of our team monitoring the questions as they come in through the Zoom question and answer box and chat. To ensure we're able to communicate all information and make this accessible to those joining in by phone, we'll make sure to read all of the presentation slides. And as another reminder, the webinar will be recorded and posted to the NAAF website, along with an option to download the presentation slides following the conclusion of this webinar. All right, and now we are going to hear a welcome message from our CEO, Tony Stanger McLaughlin.
Good afternoon, Leem Limpt. Thank you for being here. First of all, I want to let each and every one of you know that we appreciate the work that you do day in and day out within your communities to support tribal agriculture. Your dedication and leadership truly make a difference, and we're grateful for your partnership. For those newer to NAAF, the Native American Agriculture Fund is a private charitable trust. We are the largest philanthropic organization dedicated solely to supporting Native agriculture. Since our founding, we've deployed nearly $90 million across 590 different programs. In past years, NAAF has identified specific priority funding areas that we call special emphasis. This year, we chose not to include this special emphasis in the spring funding cycle. Instead, we are being flexible and adaptive to the needs of our community, and we're offering a second funding cycle that will take place later in the year. We know that you're facing challenges, and again, we want to help you in your resilience by being adaptive to those needs. We are committed to being more than just a funder. We want to be here as a long-term partner. We want to help these organizations and entities and tribal communities through sharing knowledge and best practices, as well as learning from you. This year, we look forward to all of the applications that we're going to receive. We hope that you stay tuned for the remainder of our webinars and pay particular attention to our Q&A sessions and office hours that are new this year. So again, Leem Limpt, thank you for being part of NAAF, or if you're new here, welcome. We look forward to meeting you, and good luck in this year's funding cycle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So Chanel was going to review our application requirements in a moment, but to start us off, I want to provide more context about NAAF and how we came to be and why our grant funding is focused on increasing access to capital for Native farmers and ranchers. At its core, NAAF's foundation is about healthy lands, healthy people, and healthy economies. NAAF is unique in that we are a private charitable trust and we are not a part of the federal government. So our funding is private, and that gives us the flexibility to be solutions-oriented and hands-on with our grantees and the projects that we fund. But we are also legally bound by our trust agreement, which is a governing document that outlines who is eligible and how our grant funding must be used. And the reason that our trust exists, the reason that NAAF exists at all, goes back to a long history of barriers to credit and lending. So I'm going to go over that in more detail. NAAF was created through the Cypre provision of the Keepsiegel class action lawsuit settlement, which was called Keepsiegel v. Vilsack. That was a case rooted in alleged discrimination that Native farmers and ranchers experienced when accessing USDA lending and services. The core of Keepsiegel was about production agriculture, Native farmers and ranchers seeking loans and loan servicing through USDA and encountering things such as denials, delays, poor processing, and in many cases, blatant discrimination. The roots of that case actually stretch back decades. In fact, some of the claims tied to this go back to the late 1970s and early 1980s. There were Native producers who raised concerns and filed complaints, only for some of those claims to sit idle and unaddressed for a number of years. The Keepsicle case was filed in the late 1990s and moved through decades of litigation. Around the same time of Keepsicle, there were other farmer discrimination cases, which included Pickford 1 and 2 for Black farmers, Love and Garcia for women and Hispanic farmers. And also at the same time, Native producers across the country experienced similar harms. And because of this, a class action was filed under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for unfair access to credit and poor loan servicing. And then by 2010 and 2011, the case reached a settlement. And it's important to clarify a common point of confusion here. The Keepsicle was a class action, but it was not resolved as a class judgment in the way that people often assume. It was resolved through settlement and an individual claims process, where individual claimants selected different tracks with different levels of burden of proof required. In total, 4,300 claims were submitted and 3,600 were approved. The settlement from Keepsicle included debt relief, tax support, and additional programmatic improvements intended to reduce the likelihood of those original harms from continuing. So unclaimed funds from the settlement after the claims process and the claimants were awarded, the settlement included a Cypre provision, which is a legal doctrine allowing unclaimed funds from a class action settlement to be distributed to a nonprofit organization, in this case, a nonprofit serving Native American farmers and ranchers, as long as their work aligns with reducing or eliminating the original discrimination harms that were claimed during Keepsicle. So what this means is that Cypre funds were distributed to address the circumstances that originally created the problem. So Cypre is often used in class action lawsuits and settlement agreements, but the key takeaway is that you cannot deviate too far from the core issues that are central to the original harms. And that is why our trust agreement, which is our governing document, outlines that we must fund within specific boundaries and to eligible entities. And as a part of the Keepsicle outcome, the court ultimately directed the remaining funds be deployed for the long-term benefit of Native agriculture through a structure, and that structure became NAAF, and NAAF was formally established in 2018. So why is access to capital at the center of all of our funding? Everything we do flows from the original harms that Native producers experienced. The people who filed Keepsicle claims were harmed because they could not access credit fairly, and because they experienced things such as denials and delays and discrimination, poor servicing when trying to participate in USDA lending and assistance programs. So our funding must connect back to the broader umbrella of access to capital. And when we say access to capital, we're not only talking about just loans. We're talking about the full ecosystem that makes credit usable and fair. So things like credit education, credit readiness or coaching, lending infrastructure, like building institutions that can lend in credit deserts, ag lending capacity, because we know that agricultural loans are unique and they require a specialized knowledge. Another example would be how lending works in a tribal and trust land context. So really, NAAF supports a broad set of strategies under this umbrella as long as it supports agricultural business assistance, technical support, education, and advocacy services, because access to capital, as we all know, is a connected system. And our trust agreement defines who is eligible to receive NAAF funding. And there are 4 eligible entity types, and that includes tribal governments, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. So when we ask, and you ask, why is access to capital at the center of NAAF's funding? Why are we seeing that so consistently throughout the application process? It is because NAAF exists due to the case about credit access. And on the next slide, I want to give another quick overview of what agriculture looks like in Indian country, and also an overview of our previous funding cycles. So we know that tribal communities often exist in deeply rural places and sometimes in checkerboarded regions where native and non-native producers overlap. But you'll see in this image on the screen that native producers really spread across the United States, with the largest number of producers being in Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. A lot of those areas overlap where a number of the keep-sequel claimants or keep-sequel claims were filed. Since 2018, NAAF has funded nearly $86 million in grants to all of our eligible entities. And we have funded across 590 programs that have helped expand economic opportunities to access to capital, building capacity, and strengthening agriculture. That has impacted more than 105,000 individuals, including more than 50,000 students and youth, as well as more than 53,000 ranchers, farmers, harvesters, and fishers with NAAF support. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chanel, our Director of Programs, to review our request for application process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Whitney. I appreciate that. So now we're going to dive into information regarding this year's RFA overview process. You'll be able to see, I think we'll provide a link in the chat to our website that houses our RFA overview. So this is going to be basically the document you're going to utilize while applying for this year's application. So next slide. Thank you so much. So eligible entities: 501c3 organizations, educational organizations, community development financial institutions, also known as CDFIs, and tribes and their instrumentalities are all eligible to apply for NAAF's funding. Eligibility requirements must be met at time of application. There's more in-depth information about eligibility on page 5 of that RFA overview document I was referring to. I do want to go back just to share a few notes in regard to these 4 entities, just so that you can get kind of an understanding of what it is that we're referring to when we say eligibility. So per our trust agreement, as Whitney mentioned, nonprofit organizations with our IRS Section 501c3 must have tax-exempt status. If such status has not been achieved, such organizations may apply for funding through a fiscal sponsor that has received such 501c3 tax-exempt status. I'll be chatting a little bit more about fiscal sponsor here in a bit. Our educational organizations that apply are described in Section 170B1A2 of the Internal Revenue Code, tribally controlled or bureau-operated schools, as well as schools operated by an Indian tribe or tribal organization, aligned with the language in the Section 170 of the Internal Revenue Code, qualifying them as eligible education institutions for the Native American Agriculture Fund's NAAF grant. Also, tribally controlled or bureau-operated schools granted under the Tribally Controlled Schools Act or deemed eligible by Section 5205 fall within this category as well. Similarly, schools operated by Indian tribes or tribal organizations that enroll K-12 students, including preschool, also meet this eligible criteria. Community development financial institutions, our CDFIs, must also hold a tax-exempt status, so a 501c3 status. An instrumentality of a state or federally recognized tribe, including a nonprofit organization chartered under the tribal law of a state or federally recognized tribe that furnishes assistance designed to further Native American farming and ranching activities, provided, however, that one use of any grant funds by such grant recipient shall be restricted exclusively to charitable and educational purposes. 2, the grant recipient shall annually provide NAAF with audited financial statements and reports as required by NAAF. I also want to flag here that if you are a tribe, we do require you submit a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. And this just goes along in terms of the amount of funding awarded and the length of the grant. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Lenora to share an important notice.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Lenora Moore. I'm a compliance officer here at NAAF, and I'm a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. So we just wanted to go ahead and let you know an important notice. For any of our returning grantees, if you have had a grant with us in the past or you have a current active grant, we just wanted to let you know that it is very important that you be up to date or in compliance with all of your reporting requirements for that grant. And so if you have fallen behind on reporting for your grant, then you will not be eligible to apply for 2026 funding. This means that if you have a report, like a quarterly, mid-year, annual, or final report that is past due by the time the application closes, then you will not be considered for 2026 funding. We want to work with you closely to try to make sure that everyone's up to date by the time that date comes. So please, if you need help, reach out to your POC and we'll do our best to get you squared away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lenora. So as I shared earlier, I noted fiscal sponsorship. So NAAF encourages startup nonprofit organizations that have applied for their 501c3 status from the IRS. You have not received a favorable determination letter. You can apply through a fiscal sponsor. They can provide important technical support for proposed project activities. If fiscal sponsors are used, this fiscal sponsor must be an eligible 501c3 organization and should follow the guidance in NAAF's fiscal sponsor information. That fiscal sponsor information is located in our FAQ document on our website. We just want to flag this as well. The relationship between you, the grantee, and your fiscal sponsor, if you choose to go this route, is not managed by us. So this is a sole responsibility of you, the grantee, and that fiscal sponsor to maintain that relationship. Okay, so here we have our NAAF 2026 RFA overview slide. I've covered a little bit of this, and Lenora's covered a little bit as well. I will dive deeper into addressing access to capital, but what I'd like to touch on is allowable and unallowable use of funds. So, and this information can be found on page 3 of our RFA overview. To go over briefly, just a few examples of allowable. We're required to only provide grants to entities specifically outlined in our trust agreement. So those 4 entities that are mentioned: educational institutions, 501c3s, tribes and instrumentalities, or CDFIs. The trust agreement prohibits NAAF from providing grant or loan funding directly to individual Native farmers and ranchers. So unfortunately, we will not accept applications directly from individuals. The key focus areas for which funding is allowed under the trust agreement are broadly described as business assistance, ag education, technical support, and advocacy services. Eligible entities are described in our overview in more depth on page 5. Funding may be used for projects that are either 12 or 24 months in duration. Funds can be used for project support, general organizational support, scholarships and regrants, lending programs, or capital expenditures. All applications must contain clear descriptions of the project activities and the population targeted for such support, and budget narratives must clearly show how funds are going to be used. Use of all NAAF provided templates within the application are required. So I'm going to share here next the type of applicants or uses of funds that are not eligible under our 2026 request for applications. So entities that do not provide business assistance, ag education, technical support, or advocacy services to Native farmers and ranchers, work based outside the United States or its territories, projects that do not provide assistance and or resources designed to impact and further assist in the success of Native farmers and ranchers, projects that seek funding predominantly to provide outreach on USDA programs and services, resources for those types of activities that are already provided by the USDA, projects that assist individual Native farmers, ranchers, and producers, use of funds that are not restricted exclusively to charitable and educational purposes described in IRS Section 170C2B. You are not allowed to use funds for litigation. You are not allowed to use funds for lobbying. and any other information in regards specifically to unallowable and allowable costs, as I said before, can be found in our RFA overview. All right, now getting into our targeted projects. So Joe and I will go over the 4 entities and how you can apply if this is your entity. So first off, we have 501c3 organizations, general focus application. Your available pool is $1 million. The minimum amount you can apply for is $100,000, and the maximum amount you can apply for is $250,000. So some projects can focus on ag education, technical support, business assistance, and advocacy services. So in the middle here, you're actually going to see a few of the grantees that we had funded from 2025. I wanted to just give you kind of an insight on a few here and what they spent their funding on. So we have American Farm Bureau. They're out of Washington, D.C. They had a project called the Purple Plow Challenge that focuses on Native American student interests, such as resilience and food security, providing authentic hands-on learning opportunities that connect science, technology, and ag. And through this project, it's really neat. These students are going to identify a real ag issue, design and test a solution, and present their findings to help build critical skills in leadership, problem solving, and financial literacy. We also have Indian Pueblo Cultural Center out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this project is really supporting entrepreneurs through business seminars, farm and garden trainings, and they're also providing stipends for up to 90 Native entrepreneurs. This project addresses gaps in mentorship, funding, and market access by providing training in financial planning, sales strategies, and technical support. Okay.
Thank you, Chanel. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Joe Graham. I'm from the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico, and I'm the point of contact for educational organizations. This year, the available pool is $1 million, with a minimum application level of $100,000 and a maximum application level of $200,000. Educational organizations can apply in any of the areas: business assistance, education, tech support, or advocacy services. We have, so in the middle there, you see some programs that were funded this last year. Arizona Board of Regents, that's the University of Arizona in Tucson. But what they're doing is they're working with their FERTEP agents to do outreach on all the different reservations that they work with. And in those universities, in those reservation sites, they're creating what they call task kits. They're like emergency kits for ranchers to be able to do first line work in kind of like veterinary and animal health. You also see on there the United Tribes Technical College. That's in Bismarck, North Dakota. And what they're doing is they're doing an outward facing fruit and vegetable stand, which is going to become part of their curriculum in ag business, so that students will be able to get some hands-on experience in marketing, buying, purchasing, all the different aspects, including selling, the different parts of ag business curriculum. Some educational organization reminders. We look at a broad definition for educational organization, and it covers all those under Section 170 BIA, II of the IRS code, including K-12 schools and post-secondary institutions such as TCUs, tribal colleges and universities, NASNT, Native American serving non-tribal institutions, and other institutions that must have a history and experience in serving Native farmers and ranchers. Also included is BIE schools, Bureau of Indian Education schools. Further, institutions the bigger institutions that have FERTEP agents, the RFA should be developed to include the FERTEP agents' participation. Next. Okay. Um, NAAF encourages BIE schools to apply for funding. And NAAF is very interested in investing in programs that provide information and guidance to Native youth interested in choosing food and agriculture as their future career choice, as well as specifically reaching out to Native students who attend these schools. Okay. I'm also the point of contact for the tribal grants. And so here's some important reminders for tribes. Each tribe that's granted is going to have to supply a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. This is part of the grant agreement, so it's required and there's no exceptions. Also, if a tribe is working in a project regarding industrial hemp or including it, feasibility or market studies only. No funding of production. NAF will not fund production of hemp. Next. Okay, so for the tribes, the available pool is $1 million. The minimum is $100,000 and the maximum is $250,000. We mentioned before, the general focus is on business assistance, ag education, technical support, and/or advocacy services. And some of the 2025 grantees include the Fort Berthold Land and Livestock Association. At Fort Berthold, they are putting miles and miles of fence up to protect not only to protect range, but to keep animals where they need to be so they're not jumping onto highways. And it's a lot of rural country up there, and if people are driving around in the middle of the night and there's a cow on the road, that could be very, very dangerous. The Crow Creek Sioux Tribe, Hunkpati processors, what they're doing is they're trying to purchase, or they've actually purchased already, large grain silos so that they can get ahead of storage situations in their tribe. So these are just some examples of the kind of projects that are there. And of course, if you go to our website and you go to the tab on grantees, you can find many, many more examples. Next. Okay, so we talked about tribes and their instrumentalities is the way we said it. So instrumentalities of tribes, state or federally recognized tribes, can mean any number of things. Tribal governments have the latitude to determine which entities are instrumentalities of their governments. NAAF needs only proper documentation of that status. If an organization wishes to be considered as an instrumentality of a tribal government, the organization must secure and submit an authorizing document from their tribal government to that specific effect. A statement from an organization other than a tribal government will not suffice for this purpose. So, for my tribe in New Mexico, in the Laguna Pueblo, the Pueblo of Laguna, could apply for a grant. The Department of Natural Resources is under the tribe, so they could apply for a grant. We have different villages in our pueblo, and each has a set of leaders that we call the mayordomos or the mairumas. And so the mairumas could, as a village, apply because they are a part and instrumentality of the overall tribe. So, and I spoke with some folks up in Alaska, and they had a consortia that is made up of each of several different Alaska villages. And as a group, that consortia could apply as a tribe. So those are just some examples. And when it really comes down to it, it'll be decided on a case-to-case basis.
Okay, I'm going to speak to our sovereign immunity waiver. So the Native American Agriculture Fund is a private charitable trust created by the 2010 settlement of Keep Seagull, as we reviewed earlier in this presentation. The final settlement agreement provided for the distribution of grants to federal and state recognized tribal governments and their instrumentalities. So NAAF recognizes that tribes are immune from suit or action as a sovereign government, and that sovereign immunity is vital to the functioning of tribes in all of its subdivisions and subordinate bodies. The waiver of a tribe's immunity from suit or action is occasionally required when entering into certain transactions. So the court-approved trust agreement that created NAAF contains a provision that requires tribal governments to provide a limited waiver of sovereign immunity in order to receive NAAF grant funding. The reason for this requirement stems from NAAF serving as a fiduciary of the trust funds with a duty to protect its funds from fraud or gross mismanagement. For grant purposes, accessible waivers of tribal sovereign immunity are limited to the amount of the NAAF grant and for the duration of the grant relationship. If a tribe or tribal entity wants to accept NAAF grant funding, it must work with the tribe's legal counsel to adopt a waiver of sovereign immunity related to the NAAF funding and a resolution for the tribal governing body. So tribal governments and instrumentalities must provide waivers and resolutions within the 3 months of receiving of the NAAF grant award. Failure to submit an executed waiver and accompanying resolution in a timely manner will result in forfeiture of any award amounts. Both documents, which include the waiver and the tribal resolution, can be pre-approved by NAAF to expedite the effort, and getting your documents pre-approved will also save you time during the application and post-award period.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney. And I apologize, y'all. I did not even share with you our points of contact. So Joe had mentioned that he is the point of contact for our tribes entities and as well as our EDUs. I am the point of contact for our CDFI projects and am serving as the point of contact for our 501c3s and up until Riley Disatel's return. So what that means is if you are funded with a NAAF grant, then you have a dedicated team that will work with you per your entity that you apply with. We'll work with you throughout your 12 or 24 months with us here at NAAF. So just wanted to flag that. Thank you for reminding me about that, Joe. And I also wanted to share too, you gave a great example of an instrumentality and how to apply via an instrumentality for a tribe. And I wanted to note that tribes and 501c3s can also apply simultaneously. So for example, on my reservation, there's Spokane Tribal Network. They are a nonprofit organization on the Spokane Indian Reservation. They are separate from the tribe, but serve the tribal community. The Spokane Tribe applied for funding, and so did the Spokane Tribal Network. So a tribe applied and a nonprofit from that same tribe applied, and that they were allowed to do that. So we have had questions in the past of, oh my gosh, if there's multiple programs applying for funding, are we going to be ineligible if you see these projects come through and it's from the same tribal community? As long as the projects are not identical and they are separate projects, then you can apply if you're from the same tribal community. That does not mean that you are, your application is ineligible. So I wanted to note that. So discussing here our CDFIs, you'll notice that the available pool of funding here is $5.5 million. And as Whitney shared and I shared earlier, since we are not allowed per our trust agreement to directly distribute funding out to a sole farmer rancher producer, a great way to do that is either one through our 501c3s via stipends or granting programs, or through our CDFIs and their specific lending programming. So projects usually focus on loan capital, re-granting capital, and technical assistance, business assistance. The available pool here is $5.5 million. And we do not have a minimum or a maximum here. We ask that you do not request the full amount of the available pool. So do not request the full $5.5 million. In the middle here, we have a few of our prior grantees, Occupan out of South Dakota. We have 4 bands, Pacific Northwest Tribal Lending, and People's Partner for Community Development. Pacific Northwest Tribal Lending is actually located in the Pacific Northwest in Western Washington, and they're formerly known as Lummi CDFI. And so if you're familiar with Lummi CDFI, they're now known as Pacific Northwest Tribal Lending. But all of these entities are doing great work in terms of increasing access to capital directly to farmers, ranchers, producers in Indian country. Next slide. So our youth programming, I want to note here, you can apply for our general funding that we just went through, our general category, and apply for a youth project as well. So all entities are eligible. If you're a 501c3, if you are an educational institution, if you are a CDFI, if you are a tribe, you are eligible to apply. The available pool is $1 million. The minimum amount you can apply for is $20,000. The maximum you can apply for is $200,000. Projects can include hands-on food production, support for 4-H, FFA scholarships, youth councils, and other youth and/or education activities. Noting again about the projects, if you were to apply for our general application, you are eligible to apply for the youth programming as well, as long as the applications are not identical. So do not send in the same application twice. They have to be separate projects. Just to flag two more recent grantees that we had funded. Wabanaki out of Bangor, Maine has a really neat youth project that they're focusing on supplying resources really to increase the knowledge of their Wabanaki youth. They're doing seed banking, gardening, and they're providing them with hands-on training in hunting and fishing and ocean farming career fields. We also have Star School out of Flagstaff, Arizona. They serve students pre-K to 8th grade, and they're integrating hands-on ag into their curriculum. It's really neat. We were able to do a site visit with them. They created a livestock club, and they're just providing ag education for their young farmers and ranchers and beginning farmers and ranchers. So those are just two projects I wanted to note for you. Evaluation criteria. So again, you have heard me reference our RFA overview. Our RFA overview will have this information specifically in it. And I believe it's covered starting on page 22, but I really wanted to get in and just share a few specifics on each one of these criteria bullets here. I also want to flag that in the years past, we had innovation and replicability. This year, we're just scoring on innovation. So noting that if you're seeing this and wondering why the innovation piece is different, but we have all of that in our RFA overview. And so I'm going to share a few specifics, if you don't mind. Let me find it here, on kind of what we are looking for when we're saying impact on access to capital and proposed results and outcomes, et cetera. So for impact on access to capital, as Whitney shared and I've shared, this is really the root of NAAF. So applicants need to identify how and what extent the project focuses on core access to capital issues of Native farmers and ranchers. You should also discuss the impact their project will have on proving access to capital for those Native farmers and ranchers. And as we shared, there is a video located on our website that goes specifically in depth about impact on access to capital. The proposed results and outcomes criteria is scored at a 25% weight. When reviewing applications, we're going to examine the project approach. We're going to look at identified results and outcomes. And we want y'all to really discuss clear statements of what you're anticipating farmers and ranchers will gain from this and understand what the development is going to be geared towards, and the implementation through the farmers, ranchers, producers' participation in this project. How realistic and attainable is this project? Is the estimated number? Is your goal setting? And then also what degree, we're going to look at what degree those anticipated results speak to our NAAF priorities and our NAAF mission. Speaking in this context here for CDFI applicants, we're asking that you really showcase the amount and number of potential loans, re-grants, and/or technical assistance that you're going to be providing to those Native farmers and ranchers. Educational organizations or education focused projects discuss the number of students and/or future Native farmers and ranchers that you propose to serve, and the benefits that the students will experience by engaging, in this proposed project. For tribal governments, you can discuss the anticipated impacts on your community and what that will look like. We've shared this before in the past too. Results and outcomes can look different and vary in each community that you come from. So we are understanding that if maybe your project is going to be servicing 5 farmers, ranchers, and producers, but you're nervous that 5 doesn't seem like a big enough number. We understand that 5 farmers, ranchers, producers can have a huge impact on tribal communities, tribal regions, surrounding towns. So be sure to showcase that. Even though you might think, gosh, 5 looks, 5 in comparison to some programs that are reaching 25, 50, 100. Just showcase and explain to us what those resources in this project delivered to these 5 farmers, ranchers, producers, what that can do for your overall region or your overall community. Farmer and rancher demand is at 20%. And specifically thinking about the demand, discuss why this activity or this project even exists. How did this even come about? Did it come from a community event and farmers and ranchers said, we need X, Y, and Z? Share with us the willingness that farmers and ranchers have to participate in these activities and these proposed indicators that reflect interest in the activities in the project activities itself. So identification also of the intended audience is required, as well as the location of the intended audience. Specifically speaking to project narratives here, they should discuss how you are going to be recruiting the participants or the audience for this project. For CDFI applicants, we suggest that you discuss the demand for loans among an identified target audience. Educational organizations or ed-focused projects discuss the demand or need for the content that's going to be delivered, and the projected number of anticipated participants. For tribal governments, you can discuss farmer and ranchers who are being affected and served through the funded project. So yeah, a little bit there. Team organizational capacity and collaborators, this is 10%. We're interested in understanding the skills and knowledge and all of the experience of the projected team and the organization that y'all have that is going to effectively deliver on this project. So, and the proposed activity. So we're interested in seeing these specific individuals identify the relative qualifications and the experience of those primary project personnel. We encourage that. Evaluation is 10%. So if you can share with us how y'all plan to gauge the effectiveness of your project, what's the tracking look like, the success look like, please be sure to spell that out for us so we can get an understanding of how that's going to be determined. And then innovation here, we're evaluating only 10% to which the project's going to employ innovative approach to develop or deliver assistance, tech support, education, and/or advocacy services. And what are the materials or tools that you're utilizing to do that?
Thanks, Chanel. So we do want to note that there's only an option of 12 or 24-month projects. So a few years ago, we decided to eliminate the 18-month projects, and we found that works best for everyone involved. And so next we'll move on to some important budget notes. So NAAF does allow our grants to fund some indirect funds, but there is a limit of 15%, and there's no exceptions to this limit. And so that limit is calculated by adding up the personnel and direct funds and applying 15% of that. Any intermediary funds applied for will not go into that calculation. And there's more detail on this within the RFA overview. And so, as Chanel mentioned, we do ask that applicants follow the budget guidelines and use our budget templates that are included in the application. And applicants must abide by their request minimums and maximums that are listed in each category. So some critical deadlines to keep in mind. The application will close May 1st, 2026 at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. There is no opportunity to edit or submit an application after this deadline. And the last day to ask staff questions regarding an RFA application is April 23rd at 5 p.m. Central Time. So we use an grant making platform called Foundant to host our application. And you can find that link on our website and also in the RFA overview documents. So if you are a returning applicant, then you can use the existing credentials that you've made before to log on to Foundant. And if you're a new applicant, you can create a new account and follow the provided steps. So once you log on or create your new account, you'll be directed to the applicant dashboard. Here's a preview of what that might look like for you. And you'll see at the top, there's an apply button. And so that's where you'll go to find our application for 2026. And here's what it looks like when you click on that, and then it will bring up the available applications, of which there will only be the 2026 application, and you'll click into it to apply. And this is what it looks like once you get into the body of the application. And from here, you can start filling out your application. We do advise you, the application, we do ask for a lot of detail. So some people like to break the application up into different periods, and so they'll work on it a little bit here and a little bit there. That is perfectly fine to do. Just remember that you're saving your work as you go. So at the very end of the application, there is an option to save your work. Please make sure to do that. And once you've finished filling out the application, please make sure you submit the application, hit that submission button, and that you receive an email confirmation that your application has been submitted.
All right. Thank you so much, Lenora. So that will conclude our 2026 RFA overview webinar. And we're going to turn it over to y'all for any questions and discussion. Dr. Joe Graham will be leading our Q&A this year, and our team will be sure to answer questions as they come in. If for whatever reason your question didn't pop up until later, or you're going through the application and you need assistance or have questions on the proposed application project, you are welcome to email us at grants@NativeAmericanAgricultureFund.org. And our colleague Jess Morago will handle all of those responses, and she will try to get back to you before the close of business on the day that you have sent that email. And we have Loretta manning our phone line in our North Dakota office. So if you prefer speaking with somebody directly, Loretta will be there to answer questions for you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samantha Belote. I am the communications manager for NAAF. And so I will be moderating the question and answers for Dr. Joe Graham. Joe, do you want to say hi really quick?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. This is the fourth that we've had, and so some of you may have already been on once before. But if you're new, hi. If you've been on before, welcome back.
Yes, our fourth and final. Any previous webinars that we've recorded, any previous questions that we've gotten during this Q&A open period are listed on our 2026 RFA webpage. So feel free to check those out even after we conclude today. But I just wanted to get us started. We have a couple of questions that have already been entered into the chat and answered. So I'm going to start there so we can do kind of a quick recap. And for those that are listening in, maybe it'll kind of drum up some other questions that you might have for your organization. So we have one question that was answered, and it is, as a returning applicant, our organization historically received the same dollar amount. I see in the RFA, the max request amount is 250K. Are we able to request that amount? If so, should we expect the usual amount we have received, which is 200K? Any feedback is helpful. And the answer was yes, you are able to request the max amount of $250,000, assuming your entity type's max amount is $250,000. For example, educational organization max amount is $200,000. So wanted to highlight that one. And then another one we had, is an organization eligible to apply if it is fiscally sponsored by a 501c3 and not planning to apply for their own 501c3 status in the near future? The answer for that one is an organization that is not actively seeking 501c3 status would not be eligible even with a sponsor. And then about the grant application itself, do you have strict word count guidelines? The answer is there are specific word counts listed in the application. We just ask that you don't hit total word count allowed, and that you can convey the project overview deliverables. Another question, how many letters of support are recommended? There is not a set required amount, so that number is up to you. The recommendation is letters from all partner organizations mentioned in the application. Another one, are national nonprofits able to apply to support Native farmers and ranchers in different areas of the country as part of one program? The answer is yes. Projects can have a national service area. Another question, if you apply for 2 different grants, will you have the opportunity to receive funding for both, or will you only be eligible for one? The answer is you will be eligible to be funded in both if you submit a general and a youth application, as long as the projects are not identical. That is the only restriction. And so, as I was even going through some of the Q&As, our open questions were answered by our staff. They are on it today. So, Joe, your job is looking pretty easy right now. Do you
Hey,
have any follow-up comments to
I do.
these?
I was thinking about the one about national in scope, if they can, if they're a national 501c3 and they want to get involved with native farmers and ranchers. It's very important that it's not a national organization that just has this idea to reach out to native farmers. It should be someone who is engaged with native farmers and has a history and a relationship with native farmers and ranchers. And so there's already that in place, and it would probably be even more advisable to have before the application or as the application is being constructed, that there is native input from the recipients of the benefits, so that they'll have that kind of input, that they're already involved. And it's not like
Mhm.
chasing down someone to help you do it. It's like you've already got the relationship, so let's work together on this grant.
True. So we did have a question come in as you were speaking. Question is, this is the first time I will be applying for a NAAF grant. When it comes to funding the youth, can cultural foods be considered in the grant, and as well as ceremonial and cultural enrichment when it comes to youth grant funding?
The short answer to that is yes, of course. The I would try to make sure that this is an agricultural, these are funded for agricultural purposes, and especially along the lines, it was in the presentation Whitney brought up, the importance of access to capital. So there should be some sort of access to capital component in it. And so it's probably a good idea, a wise idea to instead of trying to hit boom, 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 boom like that in your project, to focus strongly on one area with a kind of realistic component of access to capital. But we're not going to write your thing for you, so however you want to do it is the way you do it. But it's important to make sure that that's included. And some areas lend themselves more. I mean, because the question says something about ceremonial. I don't know how you're going to lend. I mean, ceremonial is going to lend itself to capital, but there's other parts, production, that lends itself more to capital. So that's what I mean by narrowing the focus.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And any question that you have, this is the perfect opportunity to have them answered. Questions regarding this year's RFA must be submitted to that grants at nativeamericanagriculturefund.org email address by 5 p.m. Central on April 23rd. That is the deadline for any questions that you have to be answered in that inbox. So please get your questions in. Maybe you leave here and a question comes to you tomorrow or next week. Definitely get those in before that deadline on April 23rd.
A couple of our colleagues reminded us to, if you're applying in the youth category, and you're applying in the general category, to make sure that they're not the same projects and that they're independent projects that can stand on their own. And if you're thinking about that, you don't want to lean your programs together like you need this one for this one to stand. Okay, because if you drop that, that's going to fall. They need to be independent enough that they stand on their own.
Yeah, that's a good call. I'm going to go over as we're maybe waiting for some more questions to come through. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Does that look good, Joe?
Yeah, request for applications.
Correct.
Yes.
So here is the webpage that we are referring to. If you haven't had an opportunity to check it out yet, please go ahead and pop over and take a look. But here is where everything that we've discussed in this webinar, this is where all that information exists. So if you look here, we have some links that you can click. Viewing applications, applying online, deadlines right here. There's that grants at nativeamericanagriculturefund.org email address, contact. In here, we have our introduction, our eligibility areas or organizations, funding areas, downloads. So look at all of these overviews, budget template, budget guidelines, sample budget. We're really trying to set you up to be successful with this application and getting one in. Then we have our checklist to make sure that you have everything accounted for, and webinars, which this is our last one, and then our deadline. And then if you keep scrolling down, we have previous recordings here, as well as RFA tutorial series, and then a list of frequently asked questions from previous webinars. People were asking questions and then the answers get posted here. So maybe you have a question and after this webinar is over and you don't email us, maybe the question has already been answered in this long list of Q&As that we have. So just wanted to highlight that.
And that also includes the webinar that we're having today, right, Sam?
Yes, that will be posted as well as sent out along with the webinar slides.
I also just wanted to add quickly on our website as well, and we'll drop a link in the chat, but we have a database of previously funded grant projects from previous years. So if you're curious about what's already been funded in your state or region, you can view that database, which provides a really brief overview of those project descriptions and then those entities. And you could use that as a reference tool for your application as well.
And here's that web page that Whitney was referring to. So you can click around, search by keyword, years, impact areas. You can see grants that were already awarded. Really beneficial.
I'd like to hit that we're really interested in innovative projects. So, a lot of times to implement a giant project, a new idea, you need lots and lots of resources, but we have a ceiling on a lot of our grants at 200,000. So a proof of concept kind of idea where you're trying to prove that something really can work is you could fund it at, I mean, if it was funded at 200,000, you might be able on a small scale to be able to prove that your concept works. And once you have that in your pocket, that would make it easier for going to the next level of funding. And you have the proof already in your pocket.
Awesome. Well, this is an open period, so we'll just hang out for maybe another 5 minutes and give it some time for questions to come in.
I did also want to note one thing. I mean, we'll be available for questions as we've mentioned through our grants at email, but also we have a chat bot that's on our website too. So you can try to ask your question via that chat bot, which will get you hopefully a response as quickly as you need it. But if it still doesn't answer your question, I know Sam had mentioned our deadline, and she'll just point out where that is, and we can definitely make sure that if your question doesn't get answered, you can join our open question period that we have, I believe, scheduled on the 16th, so next Thursday. It really will just be like an office hours. It's open-ended. Come drop in. Let's say you're starting your application and a new question came up that you won't be able to join another webinar, but you still want to ask us. That would be a good opportunity to do that. Thanks, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'm glad. I guess people are asking, have already asked their questions or have been able to join our previous webinars. What we'll do is, since we're not getting any more questions in, we'll stay open for another couple of minutes, but probably about 5 minutes after we will close down unless we see any more questions come up.
There sure has been like a narrowing of the amount of questions coming in. Remember on the very first webinar, we had so many questions and really complex and captivating questions.
It's so great. It's going to be thrilling to see the number of applications we get this year and then innovative solutions to different needs across Indian country. Yeah, I think it's really exciting.
It's very exciting.
And don't forget to select that submit button at the very end of your application. You want to make sure, like, double check it is submitted. Lenora had mentioned that in the presentation. We've had some folks get right up to the deadline or maybe realize later that they didn't actually submit it. So please make sure you're paying attention to that before the deadline.
And then one other thing to note is if you don't yet, please follow us on social media at Native Ag Fund. We post reminders, we post deadlines, we post little highlight stories and things like that. So please go over and give us a follow. And with that, it is 1:05. So thank you all for joining us today. And remember, if you have any follow-up questions, that deadline is April 23rd. This webinar will be posted on our website as well as shared with you. And yeah, get your applications in just like Whitney said. And hopefully we're talking to you in the fall. Thanks, Joe.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you, guys.
everybody.
Thank you all.